Bonjour à toutes et tous et bienvenue sur Cannes Série Live, la plateforme digitale de Cannes Série saison 3, disponible du 9 au 14 octobre, mais aussi à Cannes. So I'd like to start the interview by asking you a very simple question. How did you get into movies? What was your background?
I attended Stanford University in the United States, and initially I was an economics major, but then I attended a program in the UK, Stanford in Britain, and it was an intensive program in economics and also British film and broadcasting. And that was my first exposure to film and to broadcasting and television. And it was there that I developed a deep love of not only watching films, studying them, but also conceived of the possible path to a career. I started reading science fiction, fantasy, and horror when I was very young, probably in fourth grade. And I even advised the local library where I was growing up on which books to acquire for their youth section.
Amazing.
And I wrote I had a column in the local newspaper where even in middle school and high school, I reviewed science fiction, fantasy, and horror books.
Your very first assignment in film was with the legendary producer and director Roger Corman. Can you just tell us a word about how you got to meet him?
I graduated, and in 1977, I started looking for a job. And one of my professors, Stephen Kovacs, had gone to work for Roger and recommended me for the position of Roger's assistant. I flew down for the interview, which was really surprising to me because in 1977, 1978, women were generally in positions of little responsibility and authority. And I thought that I would be Roger's assistant for life if I got the job. But he, in that very first interview, asked me what my career path was, a question, to be honest, I hadn't even considered. And I said, thinking very quickly, I have a degree in economics, I have a degree in communications. So I said, I want to be a film producer. And that set my path from the very beginning, from my very first interview. He had already started the careers of Jonathan Demme and Francis Coppola, Martin Scorsese. For Roger, you did a little bit of everything, which I think is incredibly important, in fact, essential to becoming a producer. So I worked in his office. I cast films. I did notes on scripts. I gave directors notes on their director's cuts. I was in the editing room. I was the head of marketing, which I was not very good at, I have to admit. But actually, the Humanoids from the Deep experience was something that I pushed very hard for because I didn't want to just be an office player. I wanted to be on set. And Roger said, all right, you're going to go from the head of the department, the head of the marketing department, to being a production assistant, which is essentially the lowest position on a film set. And that was my credit on Humanoids from the Deep.
And what really strikes me in these extract that we watch is not the exploitation side, which is kind of fun. You know, it's monsters from the sea coming to steal women to mate. But the fun part is the inventiveness of the cinematography, of the editing. You can see that the people who made that film liked The Shining, Psycho. So it feels to me like Roger Corman experience was like a crazy film school.
It was the best film school. First of all, even though you weren't paid very much, you were at least being paid, and you were getting actual experience on set. And the people on that production, they have all gone on to huge careers. It was a very difficult time for women directors.
Yes.
And that was another important thing, is that even back in 1980, Roger was hiring women to direct horror films, to direct slasher films, to direct films that out in mainstream major studios, women would never be considered to direct.
I must add that in the extract we watched, the music is by James Horner. It's probably one of his first.
It was absolutely his first film. It was the first time we collaborated, and obviously we went on to collaborate on Aliens, for which he was nominated for an Academy Award. After working on Humanoids from the Deep, I went back to work with Roger Corman in The Office, and then my second film was Battle Beyond the Stars, with a script by John Sayles. And I was the assistant production manager. And one of my responsibilities was visual effects in the art department. And I went down to the model shop where they were building the spaceship miniatures to see how that was coming along. And a very tall blonde gentleman came and said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Roger sent me to see how things are going." He gave me a tour. He explained every one of the models and how he came up with the designs. And I, of course, assumed that he was the head of the model shop. That was Jim Cameron. He was not the head of the model shop. But very soon, actually, he became, from building spaceship props on Battle Beyond the Stars, he became the art director of the film, which could only happen working for Roger Corman.
You often mentioned another mentor of yours, the producer Barbara Boyle.
Yes, she was the chief operating officer for his company at the time, New World Pictures. And previous to that, she'd been an attorney. And then the really important thing is that not only did she support other women, she was a co-founder of Women in Film back in the 70s. And then she went on to work for Mike Medavoy at Orion. And without that connection, Jim and I would never have gotten the Terminator made.
It's really working on those first exploitation films that you realized that you were a producer, that you enjoyed that experience.
I really like being a person who rallies the team together and is able to partner with the director on their vision and make sure that it comes together on time, on budget, and is a good movie, and so far as that's possible. And it's very important to defend that vision.
Yes.
Because I think that good producing is the art of compromise. You're never going to get everything you want. The director's never going to get everything they want. Everyone on the cast and crew is going to have to compromise, and you have to know when to say no. That compromise is going to ruin the project.
So after that, in the lapse of 6 years, 5 years, 4 years, you moved from learning your trade and doing small budget movies to changing the history of film and science fiction with the Terminator. Can you tell us where the idea originated? Was it yours? Was it James Cameron? And how you got such a big film made after your beginnings?
Well, it wasn't a big film. It cost, not including the bond and the contingency, $5.6 million. Oh. But the largest film I'd worked on at Roger Corman's was $2 million, which was Battle Beyond the Stars. So that was almost triple the budget. And Jim and I decided, when we were working together on Battle Beyond the Stars, that we would each go off and practice and learn our craft separately. So I produced a film called Smokey Bites the Dust, and Jim directed a film that was the sequel to Piranha 2: The Spawning. And he was in post-production in Rome for the producer. He'd gotten very, very sick, and he had a fever dream in which the endoskeleton of the Terminator was emerging from the flames. And essentially that was the seminal image of the Terminator. He called me, we spoke about it, and he said, I think that there's a great film about a cyborg that in which that becomes one of the key images that will be, indelible for the viewer. And then the rest of it was essentially putting together the story and the characters to reach that moment and then figure out what the conclusion was going to be, and try to make some sort of comment on the world that we envision for the future. And that's why the nightclub in the film is called Tech Noir, because it was a cautionary tale about the dangers of technology.
Wait!
What are you doing?
Cover! So he can't track us!
Come on! Come on! No, Kyle! Come on! Come on! Move it, Reese! On your feet, soldier! On your feet!
Legendary Extract, what a treat to be able to talk about it with you. I chose this because it's a pivotal moment. It's a defining moment for the female character. She moves from being this independent, nice girl, living with a roommate, with a normal life, to becoming a hero, a leader. Was it easy to pitch and to make a film with such a strong female protagonist?
The quick answer to that is no, which is also why the film's called The Terminator. And we had everyone convinced that the Terminator was the lead. And of course, if you know anything about storytelling, the character that changes, the character whose story we're following, is the lead. So the lead was always Sarah Connor. But we did convince the financiers that the Terminator was the lead. And once we signed Arnold Schwarzenegger to play the Terminator, we were able to get the film financed.
In the screenplay you wrote, or James Cameron wrote, I don't know, her vulnerable quality masks a strength even she doesn't know exists.
I think it's true of many of the female characters, both in Jim's films and in my projects, because what attracts both of us is a similar theme, which is ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances who find the strength within themselves to persevere, to succeed, to defeat evil. And that's been never more true than in The Terminator and Sarah Connor.
In any writing, in any screenplay, the writers are inspired by people around them or by themselves. So I wanted to ask you, who is Sarah Connor? Is she Gale Anne Hurd? Is she James Cameron, or a little bit of both?
I've never really thought about that question. I think she was emblematic of so many women in the 70s.
Yes.
And early 80s. Whether it was Gloria Steinem, whether it was, the early women in the farm workers movement. Any woman who took on the establishment and fought for a cause greater than herself. And that is who Sarah Connor is. She's fighting for a cause that's greater than herself.
And we have this preconceived idea about Hollywood that it was like the 70s, very political, years, and the 80s with entertainment and blockbusters. And I think the Terminator is exactly in the middle of those two decades, with a lot of politics and a lot of, a real statement about the future inside the blockbuster, the action genre.
And I think it's important. If you really want to communicate a message, if you make it all about the message, you're only going to preach to the choir. You're going to preach only to the people who already believe in that message. So that's why entertainment can reach so many more people when you put the entertainment first, and the message is wrapped within it.
The film was released in 1984, a very emblematic year for America, for the world. That was the year of the first Macintosh, a year when people believed in technology, in the future, in the machines. And your film was a real dark statement about this future. And I think it's just a show today like Black Mirror is completely a descendant of the Terminator. How did people react to this vision of the future when the film came out?
I think they mostly responded to the story, the characters. At its heart, really, it's a love story, which I think people forget about. When Kyle Reese says to Sarah, I've loved you, I've always loved you, I crossed time for you. At its heart, it's a love story.
Yes.
And I think that it's only in retrospect that you think about the concern that Jim and I had even back then about rampant technology, I believe that the system in the UK about military AI is called Skynet. So the things that we envisioned are no longer fantasies.
Yes.
Hunter killer robots. We didn't really envision drones, but there are smaller hunter killers that are flying that could easily, if miniaturized, be drones. So I think that Jim's vision about the future of technology and the dangers that they pose to humankind are really full-fledged now. And everyone is hoping for the singularity. And yet I always worry about when the singularity happens, the AI is going to look at the weakest link, and the weakest link is going to be Homo sapiens.
The robot apocalypse is set in 2029. So do we really have 9 years before?
I hope that there will finally be a similar code among engineers and bioengineers and technologists to the Hippocratic Oath that doctors have to take. First, do no harm. And we don't have that yet. And I think that is very, very important, that we realize that we now are at the point where we could very well be creating the future that you see in the Terminator series.
What kind of cinema did you want to make? What kind of projects were you looking for after the Terminator?
I think once again, they tended to follow the same thematic origin, which is extraordinary times in which ordinary people find the strength within themselves to inspire, to overcome, and to win. And whether that was in a film like Armageddon, or or even a film that I did with Susan Sarandon called Safe Passage, about a woman, a mother, who believes that because she hasn't really achieved anything, that her voice doesn't matter, and that's also not true. I think that we can achieve that success in many different ways, and one is by being the best mothers that we can be, by working selflessly for others, and that there isn't only one path to achieving that heroism.
Was it easy being a woman producer, a woman of power in the mid 80s? Did you face sexism? Did you have to fight to lead those huge projects?
It was very, very difficult. I would be asked questions. How can a little girl like you produce a big movie like this? When I was making Aliens, the key heads of department in the UK said they wouldn't take orders from a woman, and that there must be really a man producing the film, and who was that, because maybe they could talk with them. And they were really quite shocked when I said, if you have a problem with that, you won't be working on this film. And they didn't work on the film. So I learned early on as a woman in this business that you had to make a choice. You could be respected or you could be liked. And you couldn't be both.
I love you so much, Daddy. I'm so proud of you. I'm so scared. I'm so scared.
I know it, baby. But there won't be anything to be scared of soon. Gracie, I want you to know AJ saved us. He did. I want you to tell Chick that I couldn't have done it without him. None of it. I want you to take care of AJ. I wish I could be there to walk you down the aisle. But I'll look in on you from time to time, okay, honey? I love you, Grace.
I love you, too.
Gotta go now, honey.
Daddy, no. No, no, Dad, no.
It's very difficult to change the belief that that somehow certain films are male oriented. And it's one of the reasons why up until recently we've seen so few women direct them. Yeah. I was on a panel not long ago in which one of the questions was, why are there so few women directing the big tentpole Marvel movies? And one of the top agents in town said, it's because they don't want to do them. And I said, that is so not true. In fact, I've got 2 clients of yours who are women who've worked directing The Walking Dead who would love to do them. Let me sidebar with you afterward and tell you who they are. It's an all-consuming industry, the film industry, regardless of what position you have, whether you're working on the crew or you're an actor, producer, director. And it tends to be a pretty small world. You generally meet people who are in your business, and those are the people that you fall in love with. And the interesting thing is that, you know, when Jim and I when we first met and we were making the production of the Terminator, we weren't dating. We started dating in post-production. So I think our career followed, you know, meeting, falling in love, and then we made The Abyss when we were divorcing.
Can you tell us about Man Killer and how this movie got made, and how you moved from, you know, this Hollywood projects to, you know, a completely different economy?
Well, the interesting thing is that when I made my first documentary with Valerie, who's Cherokee, it was because I had optioned the rights to a screenplay that was about the Navajo who served as code talkers during World War II. And we went to meet with the code talkers, and they looked at us and they said, why are you telling this fictional story? Why don't you tell the real story? And the real story meant making a documentary. At the time, John Woo was making Wind Talker, so there really wasn't room for 2 fictional films based on that story. So Valerie and I were able to get ITVS, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and PBS behind our film. And we made our first documentary. The second one was about the Choctaw who created a code during World War I. And then we were actually approached to tell the story of Wilma Mankiller, who was the first woman to be elected principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. And once again, in each of these stories, it's a similar theme. Ordinary people. In the first two, these Native American men who were drafted into the Marines, or in many cases, in most cases, volunteered, who used their language to create an unbreakable code that helped us win both wars. And then in the third case, an ordinary woman, a woman who at one point was sleeping in her car because she was homeless in Cherokee tribal lands, who 7 years later was elected principal chief. So you really can't tell more ordinary people thrust into extraordinary time stories than those.
I served from 85 to 87, and then in 1987, I ran for election on my own. It was the very first time I'd ever faced overt sexism. In fact, I think the phrase was, I didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of winning.
People would say the other tribe is going to really laugh at us, put us down because of a woman being our leader.
They feared ridicule. They feared being condescended to.
Sexism is like racism. It's very dehumanizing. It became very hurtful to campaign.
She had death threats. She had people calling her on the phone and calling her names. She had stuff poured in her gas tank. Her tires were slashed.
People got mean, and the meaner they got, the harder we fought.
I had never heard of Wilma Mankiller myself, which was a terrible oversight. And I realized that our history books, our classes in school don't teach anything about Native Americans, and certainly not about Native American women. And I thought it was absolutely critical to tell her story as an inspiration, not only for Native Americans, but for all Americans, to realize what a powerful leader she was, how she was a servant leader and believed that her responsibility was to make the lives of her citizens better in every possible way. And every time I watch the film, I have to say, I cry. I cry because she was so good at her job. She overcame so much. And she would have been a great president of the United States in my mind. This documentary would not have been made if Valerie and I hadn't crowdfunded it through Kickstarter.
Yeah.
So you would think, of course, this is an important story. It should be told. It should be available not only to people in the United States, but the world. And we couldn't raise the money. So I enlisted my Walking Dead actors and friends, and we raised most of the budget through Kickstarter. So that gives you an idea of just how difficult it was not that long ago to tell women's stories. So it really was it was probably, outside of the Terminator, the project in which I had to work hardest to get it made.
Did you feel that things have changed a lot in the last 3 years? How do you feel?
The catalyst has actually been Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Me Too had some significance, but there were a lot of people who were afraid to tell their stories of discrimination on set, discrimination in companies, the casting couch and all of that. And the Black Lives Matter movement has strengthened all people who have been discriminated against, who have felt diminished, who felt demoralized, whose stories haven't been told. So I think it's really been a game changer.
Yes.
For people of different genders and all minorities.
You were awarded in 1998 with the Women in Film Crystal Award for Outstanding Women who have helped expand the role of women in the entertainment industry. And in 2013, you received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Athena Film Festival. How do you react to all those awards?
To be honest, the awards have nothing to do with it. You either always feel that way, and I don't think an award's going to change who you are. I've always felt it was important to bring people up, especially women, and to do what I can to tell women's stories, to inspire, encourage, and hire women as directors, as writers, as showrunners, as heads of department. And that commitment has been with me for a very, very long time. And to be honest, I was inspired from my early days with Roger Corman.
Before we move to the next chapter of the masterclass, which I dedicated to The Walking Dead, which is a huge chapter of, you know, the last decade and of your life, obviously, is there anything I forgot to say about, you know, those first years in the movies, a movie I left out, something you wanted to talk about that I missed?
I guess the fun film of Tremors.
Kevin Bacon, Fred Ward, Tremors.
And once again, telling a non-traditional story, mixing comedy with horror, and, you know, seeing such great actors as Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward do something completely outside of their normal roles, and introducing someone as fantastic as Reba McEntire. It was so much fun, and you know, and it's a great series that continued to spawn more and more sequels, and I think has stood the test of time, even though it was the lowest testing film I've ever had. When we did the test marketing, it tested in what they call the top 2 boxes of excellent and very good. I think it scored a 40.
Before we get into the series, can you tell us just a little bit more about your job as a producer and executive producer in cinema and television? Is there a difference between those two medias for you?
Well, yes, there's a difference between directors and their authority, which is much stronger, and necessarily so in feature films. It's why, you know, you have the term that you created, auteur, the French term, as the person who's responsible for the film as the director. Yet in television, the producer, the executive producer, especially the person that we call the showrunner, is the final authority in the film. So you could say that they, in television, the showrunner is the auteur. So they've crafted the storyline, and they hire the director, and then after the director turns in their editing, their cut of the episode, the showrunner has final cut. So that's very different from features, where generally if there's a final cut, it's given to the director. So there is a huge difference. But as a producer in both formats, I'm very involved in putting the project together, in pitching it, in bringing on board the creative team, and making sure that the schedule and budget are kept to.
Little girl, I'm a policeman. Little girl, don't be afraid, okay? Little girl.
Well, I had read the comic book series back in in the 2000s. I believe it started in either 2003 or 2004, but it was after that. And I thought this would be great for television, which was something I was interested in pursuing at the time. And I checked on the rights, and I was told that Frank Darabont had the rights. And it turns out that Frank Darabont was one of my husband's best friends at the time, and I knew him socially. We'd never worked together. I called him up, and he said I set it up at NBC. I wrote a script, but it's dead. And I said, well, let's see if we can resurrect it. And he said, and I don't have the rights anymore. So that next year, we went to Comic-Con and met with Robert Kirkman, who at the time was still living in Kentucky and very rarely in Los Angeles. And we talked him into resurrecting the project and taking it to AMC.
And how did the AMC executives reacted when they saw the lead actor from Love Actually killing a little girl, a zombie little girl?
Well, we actually first had to set up the project because they financed not only the first episode, which, as you say, would be the pilot, but they ordered a 6-episode first season. And I think that what surprised us really was that the home of Mad Men would be interested in an elevated horror genre based on a comic book. But they had a block of programming that was incredibly successful for them called Fear Fest, which were the 2 weeks leading up to Halloween. And they wanted to launch an elevated genre series during that time.
Yes.
But yes, it was, I have to say, all of us, Frank and myself included, were very surprised that Andy Lincoln, who we only knew from Love Actually, turned out to be the perfect Rick Grimes.
Yes.
But his audition, the one that he self-taped and sent to us, and then the one that he did with John Bernthal in the car in Frank's garage, convinced everybody.
How do you work with Robert Kirkman? Because you're doing something very original, is that you follow sometimes his storylines and sometimes you digress and you go somewhere else and then you come back to and you invent characters. What was the idea behind that?
Well, Robert Kirkman said very early on, this is a different medium. A comic book is panel by panel, and you can only tell so much. You can't give big monologues. The bubbles aren't large enough, and and we can vary off the page. It is a roadmap. It is not. It is not the script. And from the very beginning, it's impossible to imagine The Walking Dead without a character like Daryl Dixon, played by Norman Reedus, who was never in the comic book.
Yeah.
And in some cases there were actors whose contracts were up, who wanted to move on, who were at that point still alive in the comic book, and then no longer alive in the series. And then there are other characters that we kept alive long past the time that they died in the comic book.
And how do you work with so many writers and directors? Do you go on set? Do you have meetings, staff meetings? How does it work, the creation of a season?
Well, every year is a little bit different. And now that there are 3 iterations of The Walking Dead, it's a lot more complicated. At the beginning, it was very easy. In the sense, I mean, it's never easy, but it was less complicated because there was one series, and all the executive producers would get together in the writer's room and, talk about the season, talk about where it was going, talk about it because so many of us come from feature films, talk about telling a season in 3 acts, which is the structure of a feature film.
Yes.
And because after we had our 6-episode first season, we had a split season going forward. We were able to do a premiere episode, a mid-season finale, a mid-season premiere, and a season finale. And that really helped that kind of storytelling.
I think The Walking Dead was amongst the first TV series that was promoted like a movie with, national release, huge billboards, premieres. As a producer coming from the movie industry, did you import this idea, or was it like a very natural evolution?
I think one of the key things actually was the partnership between AMC and Fox International channels to have a global launch. And that was really the game changer there, was trying to have all the territories that had acquired The Walking Dead start airing within a very short time period, trying to do it within the first week.
Yeah.
And to support that, there was a global launch with posters and advertising and interviews, and it all started from Comic-Con. And Comic-Con in San Diego was a launching pad that both Frank and I felt very, very committed to, because we knew that that's where the big feature films launched. And it wasn't as known for television at the time, but we were able to concentrate the press, not only the US press, but the international press at Comic-Con, to have a panel to launch the show.
And how did you react to the pandemic in terms of a schedule?
The pandemic was certainly not in anyone's plans, and it's been a tragedy, obviously, for the people who became ill, the people who died, their families, and the world, not only our industry. But we were unable to complete it because even though it was in post-production, we weren't able to complete the post-production on it. And even more so, we were supposed to start filming season 11 in May, and we could not start filming season 11. We were in the middle of production on Fear the Walking Dead when we had to shut down. So it's given us a lot of time to craft new episodes, to have those episodes written, and to figure out a way to make the productions that start up again in October as safe an environment as possible, and give fans what we think will be, the best Walking Dead family October ever.
So you have these 3 series coming out together: The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, and World Beyond. Can you tell us a word about this new series?
Yeah, so World Beyond is something that I think is in response to so many questions that we had over the decade about, so what would it be like if you were younger, if you were, high school, college age? What would that be like to grow up, to have essentially the world that you know best be the world of the zombie apocalypse? And so that inspired this take on the world. It's obviously part of the world, it's part of the Walking Dead universe, but through the lens of a younger cast making their way and coming of age in the zombie apocalypse.
Right now, a lot of young people who studied film wanted to go to movies. I'm sure now a lot of them want to go into TV series. How do you start in this business? For example, for you, how do you cast a young director, young writer? How do you start getting into this business?
Well, we generally don't hire people as their first job. There have been actually, though, a few of our writers who started as playwrights. And I think that speaks to the fact that we really focus on the characters' journeys in The Walking Dead. And so playwriting is character driven. And for directors, we have Liesl Tommy, who is a fantastic South African director, who had directed Denai Guerrera's Broadway show Eclipse, was actually brought on, and I believe it was, if not the first thing she'd ever directed, the second thing for television. And what we do to prepare people is we have them shadow our directors. So often it's our heroic Greg Nicotero. And they follow it from pre-production, production, and then they come to Los Angeles to observe post-production and what that is like. And it's been a really successful training program.
It's perfect that you talk about Greg Nicotero. I suggest we watch a compilation of something the fans of Walking Dead rave about. It's the zombie kills. Like you said, The Walking Dead is really about the characters, and a lot of episodes have very few interactions with the zombies. But there wouldn't be any show, any threat without a genius makeup artist. And you found the best, Greg Nicotero, who, if I'm not wrong, was a student of Tom Savini, who did the first special effects for George Romero and Night of the Living Dead.
Well, actually, his relationship from the very beginning was with Frank. They had worked together many, many times. I'd worked with his company, K&B Effects, before on Ang Lee's The Hulk.
Oh, yeah.
So I actually had experience with K&B. And he was literally part of the creation of the show from the very beginning, because as you so vividly point out, there isn't a show without the zombies.
Yes.
It may not be about the zombies,
yeah,
but the world of The Walking Dead does not exist without Greg Nicotero and his team of wizards at K&B Effects, the creations of the zombies. And literally, that is something that from the very beginning actually determined what cameras we would use. We went and tested what the makeup looked like with 3 different cameras. And that's how we actually chose to shoot the series on film.
Yes.
Because the makeup effects looked best in Super 16, much better than digitally at the time. And literally, so that was the thought going into it. To create a real universe, you have to buy that these zombies exist. We have to have the best possible actors and extras bringing them to life. We sent them all to zombie school, which Greg teaches. Yes. And that way, you create a world of the zombies that is consistent and completely believable, regardless of how far-fetched it might be.
We have to say a word about your relationship with the fans of The Walking Dead, because maybe more than another show, because there's a graphic novel, because it's the zombie world, because Comic-Con is such an important place to showcase your new episodes. You have to work constantly with the fans. Can you say a word about that?
Well, I think it starts from the fact that I was a fan from the very beginning myself.
Yes.
When I was in middle school, I was part of a fandom, but we didn't have social media then. We didn't have Comic-Con, and we still had groups where we would get together and share our passion for speculative fiction. Yeah. So to me, it was a natural extension. I started going to Comic-Con, I don't know how many years ago, 20 plus, 25 years ago. And I didn't have anything to sell. I was there to worship at the altar of these great creators.
Yes.
And that is the creators, the directors, and the comic book writers, and the comic book illustrators, and the novelists, and the special effects people. So so to me, it's always been a part of my life, and appreciating how important fandom is. And I think it's more important now than ever with the pandemic and having all of us feel so separated, to know that people can get together virtually, and have gotten together virtually as part of the Walking Dead family for 11 years, has gotten so many of us through very, very difficult times. And it brings the world closer together.
Some of the Walking Dead finales have been so traumatic. I'm thinking about season 7, of course, that I think fans needed closure and needed to talk about it. And they were lucky because they had this show called Talking Dead that unfortunately we don't have in France. Can you tell us a word about this show that has been on for 9 seasons and 184 episodes?
Well, it really is. It's something very interesting, and the great minds at AMC actually came up with the idea. And initially, the idea was that the maximum amount of time that people would be interested in watching a show where you have people sitting on a sofa talking about what the audience has just seen would be half an hour. And then it turned out it wasn't enough. You actually needed an hour to digest it, to examine it, to say goodbye through the in memoriam section to people that we've lost, and to celebrate the victories and commiserate over the grief that we're all sharing together. And it was wonderful not only to have people, whether they're actors on the show or executive producers, but also fans of the show, who are, maybe they are in, maybe they're wrestlers, maybe they're actors or sports figures, and to also have a live audience there, to be able to ask their questions and experience it along with us was a game changer. And full credit to AMC and Chris Hardwick. The power of the Walking Dead family. Every other week there's a Zoom call that I participate on, which brings, people who've worked on the show, actors together. And it really has become a part of my life, not just my work life, but my personal life. And those friendships will never fade. And one that really resonates with me to this day is the loss of Scott Wilson, who played Herschel Green, and how the character of Herschel has so much resonance for me as a person, and the loss of Scott Wilson, who I can't imagine anyone else bringing that character to life, has made the world of The Walking Dead. He illuminated with the contributions that he made, and his loss is still felt to this day.
Many of the films you produced before, like the Terminators or Tremors we were talking about before, had follow-ups and sequels. The Walking Dead is just its natural rhythm. It's like every year. Was that a kind of a dream come true, or something you've always looked for, a show that would in a way never end?
Well, I remember the first time that Frank and I met with Robert Kirkman, and he said, The Walking Dead can't be a feature film because it is about characters on a journey. Yes. And you need years to tell their story. And there's so many characters that you couldn't tell them all in a feature film. So that was something that I was looking for. I mean, I look at feature films as being a sprint.
Yes.
Even if they're, a 4 or 5 month shoot, there's a beginning, a middle, and the end. And then maybe there's a sequel in the future, but you can't count on it. With The Walking Dead, it's a marathon.
Yes,
it's a marathon because of the fact that 12 months of the year, something is going on, whether it is crafting the new season in the creating the stories, or post-production.
And there's been rumors of a Walking Dead movie for many years. Can you confirm these rumors? Is there a movie coming out soon?
Well, there's a script that
Yes.
is being worked on, and it's for Universal Pictures.
Great.
So we are very eager to bring Rick Grimes, Andy Lincoln back, and we're very hopeful.
So this is the character of Michonne, who in the beginning of the series was a survivor, something living the wild life surrounded with zombies in chains, and she almost didn't talk and we didn't know anything about her. 10 years later or 9 years later, this is season 9, she's become a mother, a teacher and a leader, but also she is still a fighter.
Well, I think having fully rounded characters, it's been common in the past, I think, for male characters.
Yes.
I think it's been less common for women. I think that actresses have often had to play one thing,
Yes.
and not change.
Yeah.
And often it's had to be within the traditional expectations socioculturally of what women do. And with The Walking Dead, and full credit to Robert Kirkman for starting it all off. It's a diverse, multicultural world in which there are women leaders, there are women warriors, but they're not just that one thing.
Yes.
And I can't imagine a better actress to pull that off than Denai Guerrera.
Of course, and in a way, her character has the opposite arc of Sarah Connor, who starts as a friend and someone normal and becomes a hero and a fighter. Michonne has to learn how to, be both.
The interesting thing is, if you look at her earlier backstory, she was a mother, she was a wife, she was a lawyer.
Yeah.
And she had all of those things ripped from her in a very traumatic way. And she found a way to survive.
Yeah.
So she didn't give up. And while I would say it was a non-traditional way to survive by going out on her own, with a katana and 2 pet zombies whose jaws have been removed, she still believed in survival.
Yeah.
And she saved Andrea.
Yeah.
And she didn't have to. And I think that was her first step toward finding her humanity again.
Seeing Sarah Connor, Wilma Mankiller, Michonne, we can really see in your filmography like different sides of maybe one hero, or a lot of resemblances, which if we go through French standards would make you an author.
Well, as I said, I think I am most powerfully driven by telling the same thematic story over and over again. Ordinary people thrust into extraordinary times. And as a woman myself, the story I most like to tell is of women in those situations. And, let's hope that I get to keep doing it for another 50 years.
The Walking Dead has a Lord of the Flies quality, where people have to build up civilization again. And always question democracy, the threat of totalitarianism. How do you think it fit into America and the changes of America in the last 10 years?
Well, I think that once again Robert Kirkman was prescient
Yes.
in creating the different iterations of what society and civilization could be like after some sort of apocalypse. And, you know, and if you look at the various signs of fascism,
Yes.
you'll find that it's not just America that's facing the possible, you know, path toward fascism and totalitarianism. And shows like The Walking Dead, I think, demonstrate how easy it is to fall under the sway of charismatic leaders, of people who say that they'll keep you protected, they'll keep you safe, that the world outside is a dangerous one. And the rise of nationalism and populism, and the idea of, you know, going back to being very insular nations is a threat not only to the United States, but to the world.
You have a very important election in about a month. Are you worried?
I think the important thing is to do what you think is right.
Yeah.
I think it's important to exercise our right to vote, however difficult that is being made right now, which I think is a travesty, because the hallmark of a democracy is the right of the citizens to elect their leaders. And that should be made as easy as possible, not as difficult as possible.
In season 9, there is a fair, there's a celebration, and one of the first things the characters do is set up a movie projection, like you know, so something that really brings people together, but also in a way something from the past. Are you hopeful for the future of, you know, cinema? We know that it's hard to go into movies during the pandemic. Do you think that, you know, streaming is going to be everything? How do you feel about that?
I think that there will always be a way to get together and view cinema. I think it's part of what we enjoy as humans. It's why I think, as you point out at that fair, that was something that everyone was looking forward to.
Yeah.
I know that my daughter and her friends have embraced something that I grew up with, drive-ins. Drive-ins are back. I'm thrilled. I love them. You know, and people are eager to go back to the movies. And I just think we need to do so safely, and not give up on it. Thank you. And I'm very much looking forward to continuing the festival and being able to celebrate great television.
Merci à toutes et à tous d'avoir suivi cette séance sur Cannes Série Live. Et n'oubliez pas que vous pouvez également retrouver sur la plateforme chaque jour de nouveaux rendez-vous et de nouvelles séries. Bon festival et à bientôt.